It wasn't about what they said. That reaction? That surge of anger? That tightness in your chest? That urge to defend, explain, or shut down? That didn't come from the moment. It came from somewhere older. Because when something small hits you, but you react like it's massive, you're not responding. You're reliving. And that's the part most people don't want to face. They say they were triggered. They blame the situation, the person, the words. But triggers don't create pain. They expose it. They reveal what was already there. Unprocessed, unresolved, unhealed. And instead of looking inward, most people look outward. They say, that person disrespected me. They shouldn't have said that. They made me feel this way. But here's the truth. If it didn't touch something inside you, it wouldn't have hit that hard. That's what makes this uncomfortable. Because now, it's not about them anymore. It's about you. And that shifts responsibility. Completely. Most people don't want that responsibility. Because it means facing something deeper. Something they've been avoiding. So they stay on the surface. They label it as being triggered. And then they move on. Until it happens again. And again. And again. Different people. Different situations. Same reaction. That's the pattern. Not random. Predictable. Because unhealed wounds don't disappear. They repeat. They wait. And then they show up, in the exact moments you least expect. Now here's where it gets real. You don't get triggered by what happened. You get triggered by what it reminds you of. A tone. A word. A look. Something familiar. Something that connects to a past experience that you never fully processed. So your brain reacts. Not to protect you from now, but to protect you from then. And that's why the reaction feels intense. Because it's not just this moment. It's everything attached to it. All at once. That's why it feels overwhelming. That's why it feels personal. Because it is. Just not in the way you think. Now here's the dangerous part. If you keep calling it being triggered, you give away your power. You turn yourself into a victim of circumstances. Of people. Of situations. Of words. And that mindset? It keeps you stuck. Because you're waiting for the world to change, instead of changing yourself. But the world won't adjust to your wounds. It doesn't know them. It doesn't care about them. And expecting it to? That's how you stay trapped. So the shift is simple. But not easy. You stop asking, why did they do that? And you start asking, why did that affect me so much? That question changes everything. Because now, you're looking at the source. Not the surface. Now you're in control. Not them. Now here's where most people resist. Because looking inward is uncomfortable. It brings up things you've avoided. Moments you buried. Experiences you minimized. Emotions you never fully processed. And facing that? It's not easy. But avoiding it is what keeps the cycle alive. So the first step isn't fixing it. It's noticing it. When you feel that reaction, pause. Not to suppress it. To observe it. What exactly did you feel? What thought came up immediately? What did it remind you of? Because your reaction is information. It's pointing somewhere. And if you ignore it, you miss the message. Now here's the deeper layer. Unhealed parts of you don't want to be exposed. They want to stay protected. So they disguise themselves as anger, as defensiveness, as avoidance. And those reactions? They feel justified. They feel right. But they're not always accurate. They're protective. There's a difference. Because protection is based on past pain, not present reality. So the second shift. Separate the past from the present. Ask yourself, is this reaction about what's happening now, or something I've experienced before? That question creates space. And in that space, you gain clarity. Because not everything is a threat. It just feels like one. Now listen carefully. Because this is where growth begins. You can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. And most people refuse. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They avoid silence. Because silence brings awareness. And awareness brings truth. So, the third shift. Create moments of reflection. Not constant thinking. Intentional awareness. Time where you sit with your thoughts, without distraction. Because that's where patterns become visible. And once you see the pattern, you can break it. Now, here's something important. Healing isn't instant. It's not a breakthrough moment. It's a process. Slow. Uncomfortable. Non-linear. Some days you'll feel progress. Other days, you'll feel like nothing changed. That's normal. Because you're not just changing behavior. You're rewiring emotional responses. And that takes time. So, the fourth shift. Be consistent with awareness. Not perfect. Consistent. Because every time you notice your reaction, without immediately acting on it, you weaken the pattern. And over time, it loses control. Now, here's the truth most people avoid. Healing is your responsibility. Not because what happened was your fault, but because what happens next is. And that's where your power is. Not in controlling others. In understanding yourself. Because once you understand your patterns, you stop being controlled by them. Now, here's the part that changes everything. You don't eliminate triggers. You outgrow them. The things that once affected you start to lose their impact. Not because the world changed. Because you did. Because you processed what needed to be processed. Because you faced what you used to avoid. Because you stopped running and started understanding. That's growth. Not reacting less. Reacting differently. Now step back. Think about the last time you felt triggered. What actually happened? And more importantly, what did it connect to? Because that connection is the key. Not the event. Not the person. The connection. Follow it, and you find the source. Ignore it, and you repeat the cycle. That's the choice. Every time. Now, here's the shift that separates people. Most people stay reactive. They blame. They justify. They repeat. But some people, they pause. They reflect. They understand. They grow. And over time, they become unshakable. Not because nothing affects them. Because they've dealt with what used to. That's the difference. Between reacting and responding. Between being controlled and being aware. Between staying stuck and evolving. So the question is simple. Will you keep labeling it as being triggered? Or will you start seeing it for what it really is? A signal. Pointing to something unresolved. Because once you see that, you stop running from your reactions. And you start learning from them. And that's where everything changes. If this changed your perspective, subscribe. Because the next video might change your life.